Good morning, and welcome to the Sunday service of the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. I am so tickled to see each one of you here today and to welcome you to our service of worship. If you are visiting for the first time, whether here in person or online, we are so honored to have you here. You are our honored guest. Please stop by the welcome table right up here after the service or visit our website or our social media channels to learn more about us and find out how you can become a part of our community here at First Church. I have just a couple of announcements as we get started today. First of all, isn't it nice to be out here? It is so nice. It feels like a treat to be together in our space. We're still learning how to do this, and so we appreciate your patience as we learn and adjust for outdoor worship. Now, it takes a lot of power to make this happen. We are looking for volunteers to help us on Sundays. Greeters and welcome table folks, thank you to Jack and Marilyn Avery who are helping today, as well as Becky Heel and Michelle Page. They are our superhero helpers today. We're looking for some more folks who can help with this. We also need people to help out with the online coffee hour at 12, and for folks who can be here for the early service to help set up chairs. These are easy ways to support your church, and it gives you a really good feeling to be part of the crew and make worship happen. So, if you're interested in helping out on Sundays, just reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with the right folks. Just feel it. Man, it feels good. Okay. Now, we have just about 100 people registered for this year's small group ministry, which is so exciting to me. We had our facilitator retreat yesterday, and I want you to know that these are some really brilliant and sensitive leaders that we get to work with. So I want you to be a part of this program, whether you've been around a long time or you're new to our community. Joining a small group is a great way to meet new people and deepen your spiritual journey. So if you haven't registered yet, we're going to keep registration open until the end of this month, and you can find that link in your Torch newsletter or on our website under the Programs tab. And finally, you know what this place needs? More fun. We need more fun. And so our friends over in religious education are bringing it this Friday evening with an outdoor movie night on the playground. This event is intergenerational. You are all invited. Just use the same rules that we use here for worship. Get a ticket on Eventbrite through the link in your email. Eat dinner before you come and wear a mask while you're here. Bring your own chairs or blankets and we'll all sit together outside on the playground. The movie is The Princess Bride, one of my very favorites, and it starts at 7:30. If you have any questions, just catch up with our Director of Religious Education, Amanda Esko, or you can visit the event on our Facebook page, or you can stop by the welcome table. They have information there too. Now, carefully, so my pages don't blow away, we shift to the work of this morning's worship, lighting our chalice today with these words by the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. There is a quality of listening that is possible among a circle of human beings who, by their attentiveness to one another, create a space in which each person is able to give voice to the truth of his or her life. This is the miracle of authentic narrative, made possible by listening that holds still long enough for our truth to be told.
getting all my things ready. Yesterday morning, I was at my desk before everyone else got up. It's my favorite time of day to sit at my desk. Before I sat down, I opened the window, enjoying the cool fall morning air, grabbed a cup of coffee, anticipating the noises that would soon fill my house. I put in my headphones. I needed to finish some writing, and hearing my life around me was just going to distract me. I needed to focus on what was important then. So I have my headphones on, and I'm listening to my recordings of Tibetan singing bowls because that helps me focus. And all of a sudden, it just stops playing. It just completely dies. So I then completely stop, startled, and start futzing with my phone. All of a sudden, I become aware of what's happening right outside my window. Outside was about 100 tiny birds that had landed in the pine tree and forsythia bush outside my window. They were singing, talking to one another as they looked for a place to wait out the rain. I was so focused on not listening to what was around me that I didn't have space to connect with this incredible experience. We've lived in this house for 10 years, and I have never seen that many birds land at the same time. Then I heard the people that make up my life. My kids talking about going to breakfast at a friend's house, coffee pouring, the dogs rolling on the floor with each other, and the birds singing right in front of my face. We listen to each other in all different kinds of ways. We listen to ourselves, we listen to each other, we listen to nature. Listening is our first step in connection. If we imagine ourselves as part of a great big web, shooting out from us would be all of the people and things and places and experiences that make up us. The lines connecting those things back to us is the spaces where listening needs to happen. Listening binds those connections. When I think of our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, well, first, I say the children's version because I like it more. The web of life's the way. Second, I imagine the art piece that we have hanging in Little Chapel. It's a circle, and it has string wrapping around it from side to side to side to make this intricate web. A few years ago, we actually did this with the elementary-aged children. We sat in a huge circle the size of the room and tossed a colorful ball of yarn back and forth. Everyone had to hold on to their piece of yarn and pass it. At some point, someone tugged too hard and it broke. We all sat there looking at the broken pieces for a moment, unsure of what to do, when an older child jumped up and declared, "I can fix it." He ran over and tied the pieces together, mending the fray in our circle. When we're not listening, our connections can become frayed and broken. When we're not listening, it becomes easier for us to forget, to break our connections within this web. Listening binds our web. So now, still at my desk, I took out my headphones. The cacophony of birds had quieted down. They had nestled into the trees. I didn't want to block out the sounds, my life. I wanted to hear them, let them distract me, remind me that I am connected through this wondrous interconnected web to my life, if I choose to listen to it.
I would like to thank Heather and Nikki for cantoring for us this morning. The folks at home watching this on Zoom see their names in front of them, but I realize that you guys didn't. You've noticed that we've been doing the same hymns over and over again. That's so we can learn the words and get familiar with some of the hymns that we don't sing too often. So we invite you to just kind of sing them in your head while Heather and Nikki sing them out loud for us and enjoy it. Oh, and I was thinking about the other thing. You know that old saying that a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for? We just made a very good sail this morning. So while that is supposed to provide shade, it's really wanting to take off. Let's keep our fingers crossed that that doesn't happen. And if it does, just duck. We'll grab it.
That's just to make us feel really relaxed.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make the bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed, no hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
Listen. Listen. Together. Settle down into yourself, into your body, and listen. Can you get still enough, quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat? Or maybe just for now, to hear your own breathing? Listen to the world around you. Let your other senses get quiet and give all your attention to what you can hear. Listen to the space in between the sounds. Listening need not happen with just your ears. If you're able, put both your feet flat on the ground. And listen with your feet. What does this mean? You figure it out. See what it means to you to listen with your feet. Now open your hands and rest them gently in your lap. And listen with your hands. Your hands and feet are open. Your ears are open. Listen now with your heart. What does your heart long for? What does your heart hear in the world around you? What does your heart hear in the people around you? As you return to your full senses, take a moment of gratitude for what you've heard. Give thanks for this moment of listening and carry it with you through your day.
So at the first service, I was inspired by the excellent meditations from Reverend Monica and from Amanda, and I just decided to share a little story. Some of you know that for 6 years I lived at a Buddhist temple, which is why I'm super spiritual, like super. But it's a Zen temple, right? And Zen is actually not hard at all. People think it's like a place to be very silent and contemplative, but it's not that at all. It really is just about, can you be here in this moment and not make anything wrong, right? So the cars behind me, those are not wrong. They're just what's here in the moment. The wind that's coming through and rattling the plastic tape. That's not wrong, right? It doesn't, the banging of the microphone, not wrong. Nothing is wrong. It's only when we make good and bad in our minds that all of a sudden wrong appears. So, the sermon is only made possible by the wind and by the cars, because it's all in this moment. So, if you can get that, no need to go live in a temple, no need to do any of that stuff. You've got it all already. So, I was just inspired by you this morning. So, there's a prevailing fantasy, I think, that many of us live with when it comes to our spiritual lives. And this is true for those of us living in the temple, right? That one day it will happen. One day we will rise early for 30, 40 minutes of quiet contemplation. Some of us will read the I Ching or the Bible or the Heart Sutra. Others will just prefer to watch the sunlight slowly make its way over the mountains, and we will be present to every moment. We will listen to the birds and the wind, and we will settle into a state of contentment that will stay with us throughout the day, knowing that we are part of the great unfolding of life on this planet. But right now, that's a fantasy, right? Most of us do not start our day that way. For many people, the very first thing we do is we reach for our phones to see who's emailed us, to see what's happened on social media, see what happened in the news. And from that moment until we turn on Netflix at night, we feel behind in our list of to-dos. We're not even out of bed yet, and the hurry has already begun. But this wasn't how it was supposed to be. We were promised something else. Industry and science promised to deliver us a life of leisure, and we believed this. In 1967, a group of time management experts appeared before the Senate because advances in robotics and behavioral sciences were happening so fast that they feared for a calamitous future. What was this calamity? That by 1985, people would have to choose between working a 22-hour week or 27 weeks a year or retiring by 38. None of that has happened. But their future and our present has really not appeared that way. On the contrary, what we have are motivational posters that are urging us to hustle harder, to boss up, to visualize your highest self, which usually means something about gains in the temporal world, not in the spiritual one. Our houses are filled with leisure stuff, but we are often too hurried to use it. Now, today's sermon is the fourth in a series of 5 that Monica and I have simply titled Listening. Listening to what is going on within you, what is going on around you, what the culture is asking of you, what you are asking of yourself, what the divine is asking of you. Now, we've created a sermon arc to move us as a community over the course of this year from a place of isolation and disconnection to a place of intimacy and communion. But before we can move, we have to know where we are moving from. And to do that, we need to listen to what is happening in this moment and explore why we feel the way that we do. Last week, I talked about the spiritual companion that lives within you, and the one that very few of us know by name because her voice has been so covered up by the rumbling of the world. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about the spiritual urge, the yearning for good that motivated our ancestors who created this community and the faith. But today, I want to talk about embodiment, specifically for us, to listen to what our bodies are telling us. And this is hard because so many of us are disconnected from our own bodies. We live from the shoulders up. We live in our heads. Jan Van Zandt calls us out in a funny way that is also a bit pointed, because she says that we are neck down dead. And I don't mean you as an individual, but us as a culture. And it's really upon us to ask, what does it mean to be disconnected from our bodies? I believe this shows up in the culture and in individuals as a broad experience of anxious boredom, of objectiveless anxiety, of physical feelings of being burdened, weighed down, exhausted, simply from everyday existence, while simultaneously being obsessed with fantasies of being released from this weight. There's a conspiratorial intuition that somehow society and our institutions are connected to this malady, and to cope, we have become numb. A numbness that allows us to feel temporarily free from these anxieties, but it is perhaps this numbing that has become the more frightening dimension of our malaise. As Friedrich Buechner writes, the people know something is wrong with them, but not wrong enough to want to do something about it. They are letting things run their course. They are getting through life. And to get through life, we make ourselves busy. Because if we were to stop or even to slow down, we would have to acknowledge the anxiety we are living with and either retreat back into stupor or press on in our investigations. And unfortunately, the evidence isn't good. An article published by Science magazine in 2014 presenting findings from 11 studies showed that subjects would rather administer mild electric shocks to themselves than sit alone in an empty room for just 15 minutes. This is what it means to be dead from the neck down. We would rather shock ourselves than sit in our own bodies and thoughts for 15 minutes. So we fill our lives from the moment we wake until the moment we turn on Netflix at night in an effort not to be embodied. And one of the best ways of distracting ourselves is work. The term workaholism was coined in 1971 by minister and psychologist Wayne Oates, who described workaholism as the compulsion or the uncontrollable need to work incessantly. This is not the same as working long hours. It is an obsession to hustle harder, which comes from within, in no small part because our careers have become our source of meaning, which conveniently, like the snake eating itself, justifies our hurried lifestyle. But how did we get here? Marx, in his analysis of capitalism, talks about how time became inseparable from the commodification of labor, that our schedules, deliverables, deadlines, etc., marked off work time from leisure time and attached the hour to a commodity, to money. He believed that the clock became a primary tool of social domination, dramatically calling out that time is everything, man is nothing. He is at most time's carcass, which is amazing. That's such an amazing line, right? He is at most time's carcass. But the discontent we feel today is not simply an exploitation from the ruling class. Moishe Postone points out that while time is a mechanism of social domination, it has now become an abstract form of compulsion. As modern people, we are willing participants in our own discipline. And we have become estranged from other relationships with time outside of hourly valuation. But it doesn't end there. Because somewhere along the way, we took one more step and time took on a symbolic meaning and our schedules began to say something about who we are as people. How many times have we listened to somebody say, "Oh, I'm so busy"? And by that, they meant they were leading a full life. Time became attached to values and took on a moral significance. We became disciplined by the clock. These disciplines became internalized, and once they were internalized, they shaped moral thinking and action. Distinctions between what was good and bad, virtuous and vile, became attached to active and idle. We are not just hurrying through life because we're trying to will away existential anxiousness. We have also internalized busyness as a moral force. We even see patterns in this in how we work with our children, who we overschedule because we don't want them to waste or lose time. There's a certain irony in writing this because Marx, of course, is very famous for saying that religion is the opium of the people. But in his day, religion had begun its decline as the moral source of meaning. Today, we find it in work. Today, it is our own internalized discipline that keeps us distracted from the underlying anxiety and provides us with a pseudo source of meaning. Staying busy has replaced religion as the opium of the masses. The poetic companions of Marx, writing not on the economic transformations of society, but on the emotional transformations, began to speak of chronic ennui, that feeling of world weariness, of boredom that devolved into listlessness. In 1733, George Cheyne published The English Malady, in an effort to describe a post-Enlightenment melancholia that had begun to spread through the arts. And we continue to live with the stereotype today that the artist must be tortured to have meaning, that great art comes from discontent, right? This is why we look at people like Jackson Pollock and say, oh, the genius of his alcoholism created this, right? He needed to be that. But that wasn't always the case. It is a product of modernity. But the malady spread beyond the arts. George Steiner speaks of the great ennui as a defining characteristic of the 20th century and faults it as the motivating force for our 2 world wars, our ecological crisis, and our obsession with technocratic solutions for social structures. Just as the Industrial Revolution began to take hold and religion began to let go, we found ourselves adrift in our search for meaning, but instead of diving inward, most of society chose to numb out. T.S. Eliot lamented what he saw. He called it spiritual anemia and a recurring human desire to escape the burdens of life and thought. And if there is anything that I am grateful to COVID for, it is that we have been brought face to face with the great ennui and how much we hate it. How much we hate feeling this way. We are not just exhausted because of COVID. We are exhausted because we are exhausted. COVID just turned it up to 11. It just raised the mirror so that we could see what we already knew was something that we were dealing with, even if we didn't want to deal with it. For centuries, we have been living with a profound spiritual malady, the malady of objectiveless anxiety, medicated with a psycho-spiritual numbness that is administered through an obsession with busyness that we have internalized and symbolically connected to meaning in the pursuit of virtue. For all of the horrors of COVID, it has done perhaps one good thing. And that is, it has given us a chance to look at ourselves, to listen, and see in stark contrast how we have been living. What is perhaps most surprising is that this spiritual malady has a name. It is acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A. A word given to us by the desert mothers and fathers of the early centuries of Christianity, and it simply means not caring or lack of caring. Sometimes people shorthand it as apathy, but it's more than that. It is an addictive cycle of boredom and estrangement that robs us of our calling. The early Ammas and Abbas of the Christian church fled to the Egyptian desert by the thousands to live monastic lifestyles of contemplation. They sought silence and austerity in an effort to understand who they were in relationship to God, to themselves, society, the cosmos. And it was in this contemplative practice that they came up, that they noticed the 8 harmful thoughts that tempted the monastics away from their vows. The thoughts are gluttony, lust, greed, sadness, anger, vainglory, pride, and acedia. What might be surprising to us is that the temptation that none of us are really that familiar with, acedia, is the one the monastics were most concerned about. The temptation to just not care lured them away from their spiritual calling more than anything else. One of the reasons you are perhaps not familiar with the term acedia is because in the 6th century, Pope Gregory, influenced by the writings of the desert Ammas and Abbas, created the 7 deadly sins, which you are probably more familiar with. But in doing so, he made 2 changes. First, he relocated the problem, the issue, away from the thought and placed it in the action, which undervalued the need to go inward, which undervalued the need to be contemplative. You only needed to be responsible for the action, not the thinking that preceded it. Second, he deleted sadness and acedia and replaced them with sloth, perhaps setting us up centuries later for the moralizing of internalized busyness. And by the turn of the millennium, that is 1,000 years ago, right, that millennium, acedia was essentially lost from our language. The Oxford English Dictionary had marked the word as obsolete. But following World War II, the dictionary brought it back as writers like Aldous Huxley began to use it to explain the chronic ennui of the age. T.S. Eliot, in his first few stanzas of the 4 quartets, writes, over the strained, time-ridden faces, distracted from distraction by distraction, filled with fancies and empty of meaning, tumid apathy with no concentration. It is almost as if it could be written today. Susan Cologne, reflecting on Eliot's masterpiece, The Wasteland, called out the line, "Not hear the darkness in this twittering world," remarking that the word twittering is precisely the term for a person or society in the grips of acedia, an annoying chatter that is neither meaningful speech nor thoughtful, reposeful silence, a noise that makes spiritual inquiry impossible. So what do? The poet and author Kathleen Norris points out that acedia and depression are different. Sometimes they're conflated. Depression is an illness that needs to be treated with the help of a psychologist or a psychiatrist and possibly with medication. Acedia is a temptation that can be resisted. The gift of the desert Ammas and Abbas is that the 8 harmful thoughts, while serious, are temptations that lead us away from our calling. Many people today might look at the asceticism and the austerity of the desert monastics and wonder if it wasn't the discomfort of their path that inspired them to leave their calling. But as Ian Irvine points out, this does not account for the fact that these states of consciousness were courted by the monks. The demons had to be brought out of the hiding, so to speak, before one could truly experience a spiritual oneness with God. The monks very possibly chose such inhospitable surroundings and an arduous lifestyle as a means of bringing on a state of spiritual catharsis. And in some respects, we see this today as the term acedia was being returned to our language by the poets and writers. We also began to see a return to contemplative practices with people like Yogananda, who arrived in the United States in 1920, the Buddhist teachers of the 50s and 60s, Catholics like Father Keating, Maine, Bede and Rohr, Protestants like Bourgeot, have also reclaimed the contemplative path as an authentic spiritual resource to address the chronic ennui, the acedia of contemporary life. More and more, we are being asked to examine our lives, not solely from a time management perspective that invites us to take more time to relax, but to examine where we get our meaning from. What is it that makes a meaningful life? But even here, the temptations of acedia can lure us in. Shortly after the return of contemplative practices that invited us to find the courage to stare into the abyss and follow the via negativa into wholeness, we see the development of mindfulness-based stress reduction that is not about investigating who you are, but in making you happier while we cook in this kettle of ennui like the frog that is being boiled alive. It is about trying to lower your stress so you can work harder. Overwork is more than just the hours we give up. It is also how much of ourselves we give up. A quote by Thoreau hangs on my wall near my desk at home, which reads, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." And I don't believe he means this as a Marxist who is talking about the commodified hour, but as someone who has stared into himself in the pursuit of wholeness. We cannot free ourselves from acedia by trying to escape it. We must go into it knowing that so many of us would prefer an electric shock to actually being with ourselves. But what we will find on the other side of acedia, on the other side of not caring, is love. The opposite of acedia is caring very deeply. We will be able to love in a deep deep way. Initially, we might be surprised that the first thing we feel is not happiness, but actually grief. But this is not a problem either. The desert mother, Amma Syncletica, suggests weeping as resistance to acedia. Not as something sentimental, but to express the ability to feel grief. Acedia threatens to take away our ability to grieve about things that matter. And this is why the world is in the state that it's in. The environment, the refugees, the politics, the endless war. It is all possible because so many of us just do not care. I don't say that like calling out individuals, but when you look at this culture, we just don't care. And I resist the notion to say, oh, those people are bad. I think it's a spiritual malady that we need to somehow engage. As a church of people who seeks to revive ourselves, of people who want to live as embodied beings, who want to shed our acedia, perhaps we might think of wailing, of keening, just so we can feel again. Acedia wants us to stay in our heads, living only from the neck up. It tempts us away from grief by saying it is shameful to wail. But this is not true. Not if you love this world. That's appropriate. If we want to love, we must cease to be distracted from distraction by distraction. And some of the time when we do that, we are going to cry. But as Brené Brown says, our capacity to feel love can never be greater than our willingness to be brokenhearted. That is, our willingness to be open to the possibility of heartbreak is the high watermark for our capacity to experience the joy of connection. And more than anything right now, this world needs people who are willing to take up the spiritual journey of caring very deeply. And I would love to do that with you. Amen.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
This is a sermon. Source of life. God, my darling, inspire us as we walk out of this beloved community. Inspire us to see the worth and the dignity in every being. Looking below that layer of busyness that masks the great anxiety. Awaken us to the great web of being, beyond birth, beyond death. Awaken us to our interwoven nature. And fill us with grace so that we might become the lovers this world so desperately needs. Amen.